guess we're good to go. Thanks, Kim. All right, well, welcome to the home hardening and defensible space redo. Where we did it, I decided to do it again because I screwed up on the recording and it really wasn't recorded. And this is a really important form that I really think that everybody needs to be aware of, because it like the TDS, if it's not done correctly or it's not done at all and it needed to be done, the buyer can rescind the sale, meaning that the sale can be undone even after close of escrow. So it's really, really important. So so I just want to make sure that everybody knows about this form and knows when they absolutely have to use it and what has to be done in order to comply with it. So basically the form is, let me show you what form we're talking about. It is the Home Hardening and Defensible Space Advisory, Disclosure, and Addendum. So this took the place of the form that we used to have for the past year, just dealing with home hardening. Well, if existing state and local laws require certain property owners to maintain a defensible space around their property, and beginning July 1st of this year, which was only a few days ago, sellers of these properties will need to provide documentation that their property is in compliance with defensible space laws, or the buyer will be required to agree to obtain such documentation of compliance in the future. Now, what does this law, what properties does it hold? I mean, what properties is it valid for? And it's sales of residential 1 to 4, only residential, not commercial, 1 to 4, which includes condominiums and other common interest development units, or manufactured homes, so mobile homes. So if you're basically, the rule of thumb is if your property requires a TDS, then it also requires this form if it is in these zones. And what zones are we talking about? Well, if you're looking at the form number 2, says the home is in a high or very high hazard severity zone. So that is when this form is absolutely required. And it's required if your escrow is closing between the 1st of July and on. So if you're in escrow now and there is a home that is in a high or very high severity zone, fire zone, then you need to add this form to your transaction. That's the bottom line. Let me repeat that. If you're in escrow now, you haven't closed yet, and the property is a 1 to 4 unit residential, or a condominium, or a mobile home, and it's in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, this form needs to be added now, okay? Or if you're just using it as an advisory, you can check the box that it is not in a high or very high zone. Then the seller is just providing this form as an advisory. So here's the question: how do you know when it is in a high or very high zone? You know, how do you know that? Well, you can go to your local NHD supplier, and the NHD will tell you whether this property is located within a high or very high zone. It's as simple as that. So as soon as possible, you should be getting that NHD report so that you know about it, and most likely a seller will know if they're in a high zone, because that what else does that affect? It affects insurance. It affects the ability for the buyers to get insurance. If you're in a high or very high zone, I'll bet your insurance rates are pretty high. So what is defensible space? That's the $1 million question, is what is defensible space? Defensible space is the name for the 100-foot area that the owners of properties located in fire zones maintain around the structures of their property. Creating and maintaining defensible space is very important to slow the spread of a wildfire. Now, the 100-foot zone is cut up into two different zones. The 100-foot area is into two different zones, and I'm going to show you. Where are you? Let's see. Where are we? Hold on. Where is it? Hey, wait. I know that I had it up here. Hold on. Sorry about that. This one. There we go. But why can't I see this? Oh, there we go. So you should be looking at defensible space zones. Somebody give me a thumbs up if that's what we're looking at right now. Anybody? Anyone? And it's divided into the two zones. So 100 feet out from the house, but the zone 1 consists of the first 30 feet around that property. So the first 30 feet is zone 1, then out from that is zone 2. So in zone 1, property owners need to remove all dead plants, grass, and weeds, remove dead or dry leaves or pine needles from the yard, roof, and rain gutters, remove branches that hang over the roof, and keep dead branches 10 feet away from your chimney, trim trees regularly to keep branches a minimum of 10 feet from other trees, relocate wood piles to zone 2, so it shouldn't be within 30 feet of the house. Remove or prune flammable plants and shrubs near windows. Remove vegetation and items that could catch fire from around and under decks. Create a separation between trees and shrubs and areas that could catch fire, such as patio furniture, wood piles, and swing sets, etc. So that's zone 1. That's what the homeowner needs to do in zone 1.
Rich, can I interrupt you just 1 second?
Sure.
I don't know if you could maybe just sum up what you said in the last minute or so, because there were about 8 people who just joined in the last couple of minutes, and there's more joining. I can't keep up.
Okay.
So
See, Kim, this is what I went through the other day. Okay, so basically, what I'm defining what defensible space is, and defensible space is 100 feet around the property, and it's divided into 2 zones. The first 30 feet is zone 1, and from 30 feet on to 100 feet is zone 2. And all the things that you need to do in zone 1 is to remove plants, keep branches away from the roof and all that. So that's all zone 1. We're recording this so you can always go back and listen if you missed the first 10 minutes. Zone 2, what you need to do in zone 2, which remember is 30 feet to 100 feet, is cut or mow the grass down to a maximum height of 4 inches once a year. Annually, that needs to happen. Create horizontal space between shrubs and trees, and I'll go over what horizontal space is. Create vertical space between grass, shrubs, and trees, and remove fallen leaves and twigs and barks and anything that's flammable. That's what you have to do in zone 2. So let's stop sharing this one. This is the defensible, it defines defensible space and the 2 zones. And now I'm going to go to what is, let's see what this is. This is horizontal, the minimum horizontal clearance. So what needs to happen is create horizontal space between shrubs and trees. So on a flat plane, the shrubs need to be 2 times the distance of the circumference of the shrubs, 2 times away from each other. They can't be bunched together. And trees need to be 10 feet away. And you'll see on a moderate, a mild to moderate slope, that distance is 4 times, and the trees are 20 feet away. And on a steep slope, it's 6 times, or 30, the trees are 30 feet away. So this is a horizontal clearance. This is the distance in the zone 2 that your shrubs and trees need to be trimmed to. So, and then what I'm going to share is the vertical space. And the vertical space is, there needs to be a minimum clearance of 6 feet between the ground and the top, the branches of the trees. So that needs to be clear, 6 feet. Shrubs should be 3 times the height of the shrub is the minimum clearance between the bottom of the tree and the tree. So that's what vertical clearance is. So this is the responsibility. Who's responsible to do all this? That's the good question. So I'm going to go back to, there's 4 ways for the seller. Wait, I see we have a question. Is this document needed when representing the buyer, seller, or both? It's needed when representing the seller. The seller needs to supply this document to say we are in a high or very high zone. If the seller has to supply a TDS, they have to supply this if they're in a high or very high zone. If they don't do it, then like I said, it could be cause to rescind the sale. That means cancel it, even after close of escrow. So just you really need to be aware of this. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to share the form. Okay, so we're back to the form. And so there's 4 ways in section number 4. There's 4 ways for a seller to comply with this law. For areas, the first way is for areas without a local ordinance. Without a local ordinance requiring an owner to obtain documentation of compliance with the defensible space or vegetation management laws, either the buyer must agree to obtain the documentation within 1 year after close of escrow, or if the seller has gotten documentation within the last 6 months of prior to the sale of the property. So if there is no local ordinance, then, and the seller hasn't gotten any documentation, then the onus is put on the buyer to get this documentation, basically. For areas that have enacted a local ordinance requiring an owner to obtain documentation, if the local law requires compliance before close of escrow, obviously it's a point of sale and the seller has to get this information. If it doesn't require it, then the buyer, once again, assumes the responsibility, and within 1 year of close of escrow, they now need to get this documentation after the sale. So those are two ways, but it's actually four. So if it's either the seller has gotten if there's no ordinance and the seller has gotten documentation between 6 months prior, or the buyer takes the responsibility and is getting this documentation within a year after close of escrow, or there is a local ordinance, and if there is a local ordinance, it either requires that it's point of sale, that the seller has to do it, or the buyer takes the responsibility. That's the four ways to comply. Now, here's the question: where do they get this documentation? Well, first question is, do we know if there's a local ordinance? It's not the agent's fault. It's not the agent's responsibility to research all the laws on the books in order to see if there is a local ordinance. It really is the seller's responsibility whether they know if there is such an ordinance. And believe me, if there is an ordinance, the seller is going to know. I lived in Burbank, and I know that up in the Burbank Hills, and once a year, that vegetation had to be cleared. And if you didn't do it, then the city would do it for you, and they would charge you a very steep price. And what else did they do? They put a lien on your property to make sure that you paid that. So if there is a local ordinance, believe me, a seller will know. But a good resource in order to find out if there's a local ordinance, if it's in a high or very high fire severity zone, a good resource is escrow officers. They know they need to know all the local ordinances, what's required, is retrofit required, Pasadena, do they need to do the home inspection? All of those things. Escrow officers are a great resource. So establish your relationship with your escrow officers to find that out. So that's answering the question as to how do you find out, or how do you know if there's an ordinance. Basically, the seller should know if there is or isn't, or always ask your local, your friendly neighborhood escrow officer if you use somebody frequently. Also, another good source is your NHD representative. They're going to know if it's in that area, and they could also be a good source as to whether there is a local ordinance or not. So that's how you find when working with a seller, from listing appointment to close of escrow, when do we take care of this document? Well, with all your disclosures is when you have to, that's when you have to take care of the document. So, and like I said, yes, that's how you know whether it's in a high or a very high severity zone, is from the NHD. So while I'm here, I'm going to add a document. This is a CAR quick guide that on this very subject, the defensible. So I don't forget it, and I'm also going to share with you while I'm here and I'm looking at this. This answer to the next question is, how do they get this documentation? Well, two sources will possibly do these inspections. One of them is CAL FIRE, and this is CAL FIRE's website, readyforwildfire.org, which I've shared in the chat to everybody. So that's there's a lot of great information there on this defensible space, what's required, how to home harden your, because the other part of this document is home hardening, how to home harden your property, all of that. It's a great resource. So if it's on, the onus is on the seller can go to CAL FIRE and say, do you do these inspections? You know, my area requires this, it's an ordinance, do you do the inspection? And they will either say, yes, we do, or no, we don't. If they don't do it, then you can go to your local fire station. And from the fire station, you do the exact same thing. Do you do these inspections? I know that Burbank does do them. So, and if they don't do them, everybody has fulfilled their obligation. So if there is a local ordinance and you've gone to those two parties to see if they do this inspection and they both say no, you've done your work. The buyer's done their work if the onus is on the buyer, the seller's done their work if the onus is on the seller. You know, you don't have to do anything else. You've fulfilled your obligation. So all you have to do is make sure that you've gone to these two resources and see if they do the inspections, and if they don't, then everybody's off the hook. You fulfilled your obligation. So so that's that. I want to go back to this form. Let me look here. Okay. So all right. So the other part of the form is home hardening. You know, this you should be familiar with because we've had the home hardening for a year now, because January 1st, 2020, the home hardening portion of this law went into effect, and then July 1st is the defensible space. But the home hardening is, has the seller done any home hardening? Well, what is home hardening? It's basically talks about the eaves, the soffits, roof ventilation. There are specifics in that website that I put in the chat. That's a good reference as to how to home harden. You know, roof coverings, if they're wood shingles, good way is to get rid of those, especially if you're in a high or very high zone. You know, landscaping, you know, getting your defensible space, you know, in order, rain gutters, you know, with gutter covers that are non-combustible. That's all home hardening. That's, you know, that's making sure that your house is protected should there be a wildfire. You know, you're not creating fuel close to the property so that the property goes up in flames. That's the simple thing about it. So that is basically this form, and I will go over it one more time, that if you are in escrow now, presently, and you haven't closed, and you are in a high or very high fire zone, if you don't have this form added to the transaction, do it now. This is a required form if you're in a high or very high fire severity zone. It is required, and if it's not done or it's not done correctly, then the sale can be rescinded. I can't say that enough. And what is rescinded? It means it can be canceled. The whole sale, even after close of escrow, can be canceled. So, so that basically is this form. Like I said, either there is an ordinance in the area if you're in a high or very high fire severity zone, or there is not. And there are two different ways to deal with it. Either for the seller to get this documentation, or for the buyer within a year after close of escrow, in both scenarios. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. And I am, okay, so this is a new disclosure to sum it up. Yes, it is a new disclosure, and it's used, remember, residential 1 to 4, wherever there is a TDS required, then this form would be required if it's in a high or very high severity zone. I would add it, if it isn't, I would add it as an advisory. Check that box that it's an advisory, just so that you're covering your bases. I'm in escrow in Porter Ranch on a condo. The NHD didn't say high fire zone. Is it still required? If the NHD didn't say it's in a high or very high severity zone, then it's not required. I would still use it, but if you're representing the seller, I would still use it. The seller's agent is not familiar with this form. Well, the seller's agent should be familiar with this form, because just like I said, if you screw this one up, the sale can be rescinded even after close of escrow. So anyways, so any other questions about this form? I'm not seeing any right now. Once again, so if the seller is exempt from TDS, they're exempt from this, even if they're in a high or very high zone. Sources to get this inspection: CAL FIRE. Go to that website. Actually, CAL FIRE's website is fire.ca.gov, and this is their offshoot website regarding defensible space and home hardening. Or your local fire department. Those are the two sources in order to get this documentation, if it's required. So, and it can be seller within 6 months of the sale, or buyer within a year after close of escrow. So, any other questions about this form? And then I'll open it up to questions about anything else. Anybody? Anyone? All right. Anybody have questions about anything else? I'll answer. You got me here, so I'll answer any questions about any other topic. Anyone?
Hi, can I have one question?
Sure.
So I came in late. So when this form became like required?
July 1st.
Oh, okay. So before that, it's okay.
If you closed escrow before, yes. But if you're in escrow now, then it needs to be added. And and if it's required, if it's in those two zones, high or very high fire zone.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about anything? I'll take any other questions.
I have a question, Rich.
Sure.
Where we can go see all the new forms?
Well, they're all in zip forms.
I know,
you
but
can.
there is any link that says about all the upcoming or all the new forms?
Well, upcoming, CAR does 2 releases a year, one in June and one in December. So you can always see what was new by, well, I mean, you can go to car.org and there's a little magnifying glass and you can say June zip forms release, and you can see what was released in June because they'll show you. I can tell you that the big release in December. What's the big release in December? Anybody know? What's happening in December?
New RPA.
New RPA, that's right. 15 pages last time I counted. So that's going to be a major release, and it probably will change a whole bunch of forms. I know that representative capacity, everybody has a problem with representative capacity, how to do it. Guess what? Representative capacity is in the form. It's in the form, and it's much easier to figure it out. So so that's one thing. Probably representative capacity will probably go away after a little while, but that's the big release in December. I'm getting trained in August, and so I'll start training on the new RPA probably October, about then, October, November. So I'll start training that. But I will tell you, I'm still going to, actually my next class, which is
The third
20,
week. Why?
yeah, the third week, the 20, well, no, that's not right. The 28th, right?
Yeah.
So the 28th will be on the RPA, the present RPA, not the new one, the present one. So so because people are still asking how to fill it out. So okay. In the purchase agreement, if the, go ahead, sorry.
And then last question,
Sure.
the PID. So I didn't see PID on the required document anymore. The new one came out. So
You don't need them.
You don't need that
They're
anymore?
not required. Nope.
Okay. So we have
No
to do the new one?
no coronavirus documents anymore.
Oh, that's cool. Because again, another one came out recently. That's
Another
covers
PID?
everything. It's not PID.
The,
It's
oh, the
another.
PID all. The PID, yeah, but the
Uh-huh.
PID all went away when the state lifted all the you know, like it did never really happen. The whole year never really happened. Then the PIDs went away. You no longer have to do any PIDs.
Oh, okay.
You know, you don't have to do that. So
Sounds good.
okay, in the purchase agreement, if the buyer doesn't ask for retrofitting, that means buyer has to do retrofitting. That's a trick question, Mitra, because here's the deal. Retrofitting is a county requirement. It's required. It's a law. We can't, everybody says, oh, we're going to waive retrofitting. We can't waive retrofitting. Only the broker can decide if they will allow retrofitting to be waived. And the only times I will consider it, because it's breaking the law for all parties, the only time I will consider it is if it is presently vacant, it's not going to be occupied, and it's going to be torn down. That's the only time that I can ever really truly consider it. Because here's the thing, if it's presently occupied and you don't do the retrofitting, and something happens and there's a fire and there was no smoke detector, or there was no carbon monoxide detector, and there was some sort of horrible accident, there's a liability issue there. And so in protecting you as the agent and us as the brokerage, we can't allow retrofitting to be waived. So going back to the question, if it's not asked for, it still needs to be done. So somebody has to pay for it. If it's not in the contract that the buyer is going to pay for it, then sadly, I think the assumption is that the seller will pay for it, because that's the way it normally is. I'm representing seller and buyer, didn't ask for a buyer as a developer investor. Okay, just my point. Is it vacant? Is it, it still has to be done. There still has to be that certificate of compliance. So unless there's that certificate of compliance that's required, then you don't have a complete file. Guess what? If you don't have a complete file, you don't get paid. So somebody has to do it. Somebody, and if the buyer's not going to do it, then the seller should do it. It has to get done. It's a law. It's an ordinance. This isn't a whim. Same with the 9A report. Great example of a 9A report that people say, it's a useless piece of paper. It doesn't really tell you anything. Well, I don't know if the agent, I don't see the agent on here now, but right now, an agent is in a deal on a multi-unit property. The seller says it's a 3-unit. The 9A says it's 2. This is public records. This is what the city of Los Angeles says, that it's only 2 units, but the seller is saying it's 3. So now there has to be an investigation to the satisfaction of the buyer, because the seller is giving documentation of a good argument that it's really 3 units, and the city kind of doesn't have it right. But the buyer has to satisfy themselves. We can't say, oh yeah, don't worry about it, it's fine. They've been paying for 3, they've been paying the city, a license fee for 3 units for years and years. Don't worry about it. We can't say that. The buyer has to do their own investigations to make sure that they're satisfied that what they're buying, even though the city says it's 2, that it really is 3. So that's one example. The other example is there's a litigation in one of my offices where the seller, for years and years and years and years, 20-some years, lived in the property. They sold the property. The buyers did a sewer inspection. The camera got stuck somewhere, so they said, oh, it needs to be cleaned out. The camera person said it needs to be cleaned out. Does whatever, they took a credit to clean it out. They're going to pay to have it cleaned out. Come to find out, there's a septic tank. It was never hooked up to the sewer line. So all these years, there's septic. They even built a room on top of the septic tank, and there's a septic tank there. Seller never knew it, obviously didn't disclose it because they didn't know it. They thought they were hooked up to the sewer. The 9A says sewer permitted. So the 9A says that it's hooked up to the sewer. So, so my point is, this always isn't like a useless piece of paper. So, so where I was going with that is that we can't waive the 9A either. It's required in the city of Los Angeles. So that's where, that was a long way about for that. So sorry about that. Any other questions on any other topic? Anyone? Okay, I don't see any questions. So it's 4:40. I thank you for joining. Remember, this is a very important document, and use it where it needs to be used. I would just use it, whether it's in the high or very high. I would use it as an advisory, just so you don't miss it. if you don't think you need it, is when you don't use it, and when you inevitably should have had it, and then then I get brought in. So I don't want to do that. Okay. So thank you. I happy selling. Stay safe. Stay healthy. And like I said, next class on the 28th is the RPA. All right. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Rich.